Welcome to another episode of Let's Not Circle Back. Black History Month is here, and we have such a dynamic conversation coming up. Remember that Black History Month is a pause. It's a mirror to who we are, to what we've done, to who we've elevated. It's our progress report for our upcoming year. We're not circling back, but let's circle forward.
It is Black History Month. And this year it feels a little different because people are tiptoeing around Black History Month more than they have in prior years. Talk to me about what should Black History Month have been about?
Yes. I think that's the great part of that question is the fact that I don't think people actually stop and think about that. Like, what is the purpose of it? What are we celebrating? The whole purpose of Black History Month, which was called Negro History Week, that started in 1926 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was an educator and a historian. So I think that is poignant to remember. He was a historian. The whole purpose was to integrate Black contributions into American history. Because if it is not recorded, it does not exist. In the academic realm, if you've been to school, especially if you're teaching at the professorship level, you know that research, it doesn't work if it's not recorded. Like, it doesn't exist. We don't even look at it to say it's great anecdotally, but it's not real if it cannot be researched, recorded, and then scaled in some way. Like, somebody needs to be able to replicate whatever you're doing. So for him to say, hey, folks are missing from history, we need to make sure that we are adding to that when it comes today, 100 years from now, when folks are saying, why are we doing this again? We have a plethora of data that showcases who we are, what we've contributed, and why it's still important. And I think that's what people forget. This is not about rehashing trauma, which is what I think people are doing. It's Black people still doing stuff today that is still adding to the history of the countries that we have inhabited, specifically when we think about North America. I truly feel like people just don't recognize what celebration means because they're looking only at a quarter of the pain that we've had. And we're saying, understand the pain, but you need to understand us and how we've gone past that. We have not forgotten, but we have to be able to move forward. So Black History Month is really a report card. It's our progress report. We like to sit back and be like, okay, what have we done in the year? What has contributed to our ability as a culture, as a people to move forward? And we would love for other people to look at that as well and maybe take a litmus test themselves. What has happened that you can say, not only am I proud of this, but we want to elevate it as well.
And so we do often get the calls in January saying, hey, can you review this? And hey, this month we celebrate Black History Month. Your first question is, how are you celebrating? And they're like, I mean, this post. It's like, is that a celebration? Is that an acknowledgement? And so really the words mean a lot, right? Yes, if you want to make a post and it's about acknowledging and or highlighting, then use those words. But then I'll ask you, like, I do see a lot of companies now tying it to their industry, which I love, saying, hey, did you know, some of the first firefighters and some of the first people who created the fire safety gear. But should it be normal, not about excellence or firsts? How do we actually move this forward? Instead of showing one person, is it showing, hey, here are the 52 new doctors or scientists, to show that it is more than one and more of a group?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that the measure of excellence has been moved. If you go into a space, and I'll use craft beer because, I love beer. And when I first went into craft beer, I'm like, this is white dude's territory. Why am I here? How do I find my place? And then I remember I was a part of a campaign that was Craft Beer is Black History. And we got a lot of different feedback from that. But one of the things that I appreciate that the brewery did was they gave you the history of brewing. And so they talked about how it looked in West Africa, why it was important, how women were a part of that. And for you to talk about Black history or to talk about craft beer history and not talking about the Black influences was incomplete. And so I think that's where it comes from. And so it's creating this complete history. When you see a Black brewer, they're not exceptional. They've always been here. They're just following in the footsteps of folks that came before them. You can't be exceptional if everybody can do it. So then it was like, oh, well, if we want to keep it exceptional, then we got to keep only these three people. Those three people, they're carrying the weight of everything. They burn out. And then you got 60 years before you do it again. So that's what integrating it better into the history of the industry does. It allows for people to see themselves. When I talk to students, there's a flow chart that I use called the psychosocialization. And one of the things is like the first socialization that you get is the dreams of others. You didn't have that dream to go to college because you didn't know what college was. Somebody gave you that dream. You are fulfilling something that somebody gave you. Now, once you get to that point, you then figure out, oh, this is actually for me. I should go in this way. But in the meantime, they're just being a baby, trying to exist. They have no idea what has already been planned for them. And so in the cycle of socialization, it talks about how we're socialized into the spaces to which we find a sense of belonging. They are given to us first. And so when I talk to my students about going into college, I was like, how many of y'all were saying that? How many were like, I'm going to be in a business school and I'm going to take finance? You were 3. You weren't thinking that, but dad was. And he normalized it for you because he took you around to his job. You heard his friends. You might have did some, maybe not interning when you were 10, but you were in the basement when they were going over stuff. You see it. And so now you start forming this image that's already been gifted to you. That's what bringing this into the forefront does. It allows people to be seen. How many times have I been in spaces and been like, I'm the only one? And then I find out years and years down, like, no, you ain't the only one. I see myself as a queer Black person. I couldn't see that because it wasn't introduced to me. So I thought I was an anomaly. Like, okay, I want to be in education. I want to have these types of conversations. I want to be in these rooms, but I'm going to be the first one to do it. And it's like, no, it almost makes me think about like, how arrogant was I to think that I would be like, I was the first one, but it was because it was never shown to me. So I actually did not know. Provides in your industry, in your space, for your professional development, for your human psyche, to be able to see people and it be something where you can find a sense of belonging. They're saying, where do I fit? And it's a conversation that marginalized and minoritized people have been having for centuries. We are the history of, it's your turn now. I think that's we have it. And we have to also acknowledge just because you went through harm doesn't mean that you need to inflict harm on somebody else. That's what we're supposed to do, is learn from that so that it doesn't happen again. We know our history well enough to know this is going to repeat itself if nobody challenges it.
And we do need those nudges in the moments to sit back and say, what's going on, right? And we have a lot of other examples of that. What would you say to someone who says, well, where's my month? Because I don't see my month. And that comes up a lot because you've got Black History Month this month, you've got Women's History Month and Women's History Day, and then you've got Pride. What do you say to people who goes, well, where's my month?
Yeah, the first thing I say, and it may be controversial, is that that's valid. It's a valid ask to say, where am I? Humans need a sense of belonging. We want to belong to something. And when we see others who have a strong sense of belonging, we then look at ourselves and say, well, where was mine? No different than a kid. Everybody's eating ice cream. And you're like, well, where's my ice cream? I think I should get ice cream too. What have I done that my ice cream is not available like everybody else's? So one of the things I would say is, in order for folks who are not seeing themselves represented, is to, one, showcase collectively how we can move forward. Because the only reason why we're still having these conversations is because it's still not being recognized in the ways that it should be. It's not because we just really like to toot our own horn, even though we do. And it's valid. So let me also say that. But the reason is because we're still forgotten. We're still looked at as exceptional when we do something that is normal, when you have a higher rank. But because it's still the first, in a line of a historical blocking, it becomes noteworthy. Not because we're trying to be exceptional, we're just trying to be normal. And that's the part that people sometimes forget. Black excellence is phenomenal, but Black regularness is also awesome too. And that's the part that I think that people are forgetting. Being the first Black queer assistant dean to me is not noteworthy because I feel like, well, I did this and I followed this trajectory and I got this opportunity and I used this platform to do things. I don't think it's extraordinary or exceptional, but I'm still the only one. That's where the problem lies. If it was something that we could support on a regular basis, we wouldn't need this because it would be integrated into every facet the way other people's lived experiences have been. And so this announcement of exceptionality in everything has become the norm so much that we rely heavily on merit as the only sign that you are worthy. So that's why I said it's valid. Like the feeling is valid, and we have to talk about why that normalization is causing such division and really wreaking havoc. Because everybody is trying to overcompensate by having to be exceptional all the time. When do you get a chance to just exist? I think that's one of the things that Gen Z is saying. Let me exist. And we're like, we've been exceptional. So that's the bar. You want to exist, you got to exist at the bar of excellence. And then we will raise you even more from that.
Right. I remember having the first conversations years ago saying we need to figure out where do white cisgender heterosexual men, where's their sense of belonging without it only being an ally. And so they're like, they're welcome to come to all of these other employee resource groups, but honestly, they're allies, which is great. We all want to be allies, but there needs to be a moment where we belong. So we were kind of pushing years ago saying we need to have employee resource groups that look and say this was created with you in mind, and what does that look like for every population. But I do want to go back to your comment about what you felt the goal of Black History Month was, kind of this visibility and legitimacy, but also normalizing and not trying to erase any other history.
That's the cool thing about history. You cannot understand how things should be if you don't understand how things have been. And that is something that we have to be aware of. We are in a different time. What we are showcasing, and particularly what Black History Month has been and what it continues to be, is it is a opportunity that happens once a year, is incomplete without Black intellect, is incomplete without Black leadership, is incomplete without innovation, Black labor. I want you to have the whole story so that you can make informed decisions. And if you have places that are incomplete, you need to fill that gap. And so as we talk about this, we bring in Indigenous folks, we bring in folks from the Asian diaspora, from the Latin diaspora, and also from the European diaspora, because the history would be incomplete if you did not have all of these people a part of it. We recognize that there has been an intentional suppression of that history in order to provide these gaps that anybody knows anything about neuroscience. If you have a gap in memory, we fill it with whatever we think is supposed to be here. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually what happened. And so we're saying, hey, we're the gap. Don't forget, it's incomplete if you don't say this and you don't talk about this and you don't talk about this. White freedom riders and activists and allies. And they're like, I didn't know that. Let's go back and talk about how these folks have come in, particularly a lot of white men who came in and sacrificed, even laid their life down in order for the history to be complete. So even then, if we don't know their names and we don't talk about them in the ways that we need to, the history continues to be incomplete. It's a way for us to ring the alarm and say, hey, don't forget, because if you think about Black history as a complete understanding, you will see every diaspora of people somewhere woven into, and it then takes its own thread and builds into movements. Chicano movement is built out of this, women's movement, LGBTQ movement. All these movements are built out of acknowledging, hey, we need that history is incomplete. And so for me, Black history obviously is going to always center Blackness and Black excellence and Black intellect and Black labor. But I don't forget all of the other threads that have weaved this tapestry that allows our history to be something that can be elevated and provide excellence. We had folks that supported us along the way. And that also has to be a part of making that history complete.
And I do think we're seeing this opening right now to move forward.
Mm.
And I want to take this opening. And I
Yeah.
think some of the things that I just heard you say that I think are important and worth highlighting again, which is if you've gone through pain, your goal shouldn't be that somebody else needs to go through the pain so that they can understand your pain. And that used to be how we felt, is that you can't have empathy unless you go through it. And I do believe there were practitioners who wanted people to feel the pain. And I do think you can have empathy without feeling the pain. Now we're pivoting from celebration of these particular moments to what's the responsibility going forward. So what does that look like in terms of moving us from celebration to responsibility? What's that pivot look like?
One is to get our minds off of the guilt. Guilt has never worked. It has never helped anybody get any further. It's made that person feel bad. There's a selfishness to guilt, right? When a company starts talking about their values, you're like, what are the behaviors you want to see? Because now I can work with a behavior. I can't just work on that intangible. I want people to feel like I can't measure the feeling that they'll have. And, as Lil Wayne would say, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. So what they say is one thing as opposed to that behavior. I can measure that. And so when we move from celebration to implementation, how are we creating avenues to support everyone? Not just to say, hey, let me highlight this group. That may be the thought process of I need to highlight marginalized people. Absolutely. I'm not taking away from that. But in that, you still can't be exclusive. So inclusion has never meant exclusion. You can't say I'm going to include everybody, but not this half of the room. Doesn't work like that. So what are the steps? We are in an era now. We have this window of opportunity to make some change. And I think what we can do for implementation services is now go back to what we've done. Some of the stuff around DEI, some of the initiatives that were to uplift marginalized communities. Look at that and say, am I intentionally doing everything I can so that every person that comes into this space feels wanted, they feel a sense of belonging, and they trust that what we're doing is in the best interest of moving us forward as a collective. If you can look at that and see what you're doing well and continue doing that, and where you have gaps to start to close those gaps, now you can start measuring the behavior more efficiently and effectively. Because if I look back at history and look back at what Dr. Carter G. Woodson was asking America to do, it was to not forget me. That's all he was asking. Don't forget that I was here. When you look at the picture, I shouldn't be the one that got cropped out. I was there too. I want to be able to be proud as a collective of what we have done. So as an organization, one of the things I love that happened when I worked at New Belgium is our first week of onboarding, we're meeting with the director. He was the director of fun. That was his job. He was awesome human being, director of fun. And I remember he said something that was so profound. Today, we add you to the history of our organization. There was a chart that we got to put like little push pins in, and it was a symbolic gesture to say, this is when our time started. And now we add to the rest of the history of this organization. They gave us all of the backstory. They told us all the history that came before us, all the great people that worked there, even to the point there were people who passed away when they were on the job. We learned about them. But then our day came where we get to add to this history. So everything forward, even if we stop working there a week from now, we're still part of the history. We were a part of that cohort. And so I never forgot that. That's what organizations need to be doing. That's how you provide the civil piece of why you tie this all together, why having these types of conversations matter. Because what Black History Month was intended to do was to provide the rest of the story. And this is our push pin moment where we can stop and reflect and say, as an organization, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we actually moving us forward? If you looked at it that way, I guarantee you, not only would you fulfill the needs of all of the folks, but you would also give yourself this barometer of, are we fulfilling what the whole purpose of this month was? You want to celebrate somebody. Remember, you think about a celebration of life only talks about the great things that the person has done as it relates to others. You don't normally talk about just their job. You talk about how they made people feel on their job. People talk about them and they tell you, this is who this person was to me. This is how they added to my life. This is a remembrance of life moment. And if you look at Black History Month as a remembrance of life moment, you would not only be able to celebrate what Dr. Woodson was trying to create, but you add a history in your own organization that says we are actively engaged in moving everybody forward. And we're going to take a real hard look to ensure that we actually do that. That's a celebration of life. And that would be much more meaningful than you sending out a post that says Happy Black History Month.
Well, pulling back in, you were talking about civility in the workplace. And I think the word civility is a word that people should grab onto more so than respect. Whenever we see in companies' values, they have this values of respect. I got to get a little like respect what, right? And even the word values, I think companies should go away from having these like shared values because even that, it's like, what does that actually mean? You've got personal values. And I had one client who just asked in a survey, do your personal values align with the company's personal values? I'm like, how does a company have personal values? Are they pro-life or pro-choice? I don't know. So I think that we're looking for clarity, and it's what are the behaviors we're expecting of everyone. I would love to see the word values just removed completely from companies and say, what are the behaviors that are non-negotiable within our organization? Civility to me means I can disagree with you and still have a conversation. When you throw the word respect in, I'm like, am I supposed to be respecting your opinion, respecting you as an individual? And a lot of times that's a tough ask for people. So they end up shutting down and saying, I don't want to have this conversation because I'm not going to be able to respect your opinion. So I like the word civility better because it allows you to have a conversation without trying to come to some common understanding. Because when I was going through leadership training back in the 90s and early 2000s, the goal was if you and I just keep talking, at some point, I'm going to understand your point of view a little bit better. You're going to understand my point of view a little bit better. But when it comes to things like, should women have the right to drive? Is it necessary for me to have a conversation with a coworker about my right to drive so that I can understand your point of view? And the answer is no. But can I still be civil with you in a workplace? I can. But we're not going to have the same values in terms of what my abilities are as a woman to be able to work or drive in a certain country. We're asking people to be civil to each other. We can call it manners, we can call it whatever we want. These are a set of behaviors that we're expecting of every single person who comes to work here. And these behaviors are not negotiable. And here they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can measure behaviors, you can see the existence of those behaviors. When you're talking about these aspirational, inspirational values, you can't measure those and you can't visibly see if they're actually happening. So I'd love to see our language get a heck of a lot more basic and clean and removing these again aspirational words that we all go, oh, of course.
I think that's one of the containments of English language. We got a word for everything. I think about my Gullah Geechee background. They don't have a specific definition. They are a placeholder in whatever we're doing. English language is no, I gotta know exactly what the word means. It's one of the reasons why we have so much problems with pronouns right now. People still do not understand how pronouns work because they have a very narrow view of that. And it's very, very hard to explain that generationally. Whereas in Gullah Geechee language, for a pronoun, we just use the letter E. That's it. E this, E that, E said this, E said that. That's it. They're good. And they know I'm talking about a person. That's it. That's all you need to know. But you don't need to know if it's a he or she. Why? Because it doesn't matter, because there is not a new privilege that is added to this conversation because this person now has been identified as this. So I think one of our issues is that we assign worth to very specific words. And that's why we're so like, did you really mean this when you said that? Because now that means I have to think in a different way. And one of the things that civility does is that civility has a willingness to tell the full truth without erasing people. That's what civility requires. And respect is that fine line, because respect is now telling you, no, the minute you don't feel that you want to be in this conversation anymore, you can leave, and you can use the term respect to then remove yourself from the situation. Civility is you can absolutely stop the conversation, but you're not stopping the conversation for anything other than I'm not going to engage with you anymore. Respect is like, well, I felt disrespected. So now I can respond. My rebuttal can be just as toxic if I feel as yours. My rebuttal, if I want to, can be as violent as I want it to be, out of under the guise of respect. Civility is like, I don't agree with that, and we're not gonna have this conversation. You don't believe that women should drive. Continue on. Let's continue doing what we're doing. We're not about to engage in this. I'm just not going to engage in this. Oh, well, don't you want to hear my side? No. Civility still tells the truth. I don't want to hear your side of the story because I know it's going to be one-sided.
So respect is the easier way out. As soon as you say, well, they were disrespectful, then the conversation ends, versus civility. It's on you to say, I don't want to continue this conversation. I'm civilly saying I don't want to, which is fine. And so civility is a bit harder because it's something you get to throw down and go, well, that was disrespectful. Or
right, people say they're not respect, they get up and walk away. You're like, I don't even know if the conversation ended. Civility, you have to end it. We're not going to agree. So there is a very adult way, and it should be what is in the workplace.
Yep. Somebody can disrespect you, but your floor is still civility, right? So just because somebody disrespects doesn't mean you disrespect. Your floor is civility in the workplace. So that's really where I would love to see us go to, is like using the words, talking about civility, teaching people what it looks like to have conversation. And so that's where I really like, I know we've got a whole nother segment on collaboration hubs and how ERGs are moving towards collaboration hubs. And I do think people genuinely want to, more than ever, have conversations with their colleagues about things that are going on in the world, but they just don't know how to at this point. So teaching people how to have civil conversations, how to end them civilly, how to have these robust conversations with your colleagues, I think is what everybody needs right now. And that's where I love that ERGs are going.
When we think about civility, we think about this opportunity for us to be able to speak truth to power, to be able to be in some uncomfortable moments. But most importantly, it allows us to tell the truth without erasing pieces of it. That is what Black History Month has always been. It was created 100 years ago for the truth to be told in its full authenticity. When we talk about the European diaspora, the Asian diaspora, the Latino diaspora, the African diaspora, we're talking about a tapestry of people, places, human expressions that are not forgotten. Thank you, Dr. Woodson, for not allowing us to forget the whole story. The whole story has always began, and it will end with us. And that's us as a collective. So this Black History Month, I implore you, I beseech you, I ask you with all the love that I have in my heart to remember the full story, to remember every player that was a part of it, no matter the diaspora that they represent. We all represent the diaspora of history. And now, even 100 years later, we still remember why Negro History Week was intended. And that was to tell the full story. Meet us next time on Let's Not Circle Back.